November 4, 1892, Cana, the Kingdom of Dahomey. The air is thick with gunpowder and the smell of wet earth. A heavy mist clings to the palm trees, blurring the horizon where the French columns advance. From the brush ahead, a low humming rises, a rhythmic chant, deep and fierce, swelling like thunder. Then they appear. Women, dozens of them, barefoot, their legs wrapped in strips of red cloth, bodies streaked with white chalk. Their eyes are sharp, unblinking. Each carries a long musket across her shoulder, a machete strapped to her hip. Around their necks, amulets of bone and iron, protection from bullets, they believe. A French Lieutenant A. Young, pale and sweating through his uniform, freezes at the sight. "Ce sont des femmes," he whispers under his breath, "women." But before the thought can settle, the lead warrior lets out a cry, a sound raw and electric, and the forest explodes into motion. The Dahomey Amazons charge. Their formation is tight, practiced, lethal. They move through the underbrush like a single organism, silent until the final second. Muskets crack, smoke fills the air. One Amazon leaps over a fallen trunk, machete flashing, and cuts down a French sergeant before he can raise his rifle. Another hurls a spear that finds its mark in a blue-coated chest. Behind them, the French commander, Colonel Alfred Amity Dodds, a seasoned officer born of African and European blood, watches through his field glass. Even he can't hide his astonishment. These weren't irregulars. They weren't villagers defending their homes. They were trained soldiers, disciplined, fearless, methodical. For years, European missionaries and explorers had written about them, the women warriors of Dahomey, but many in Paris laughed it off as local myth. Now, standing amid the chaos of Cana, no one was laughing. The crackle of gunfire merges with screams and the pounding of war drums echoing from the distance. The Amazons press hard. They flank the French right, forcing Dodds' men into a defensive line. The colonial soldiers, veterans of Tonkin and Senegal, have never faced anything like this. Every time one of the Amazons falls, another steps forward, firing without hesitation, chanting the names of ancestors. One French corporal later wrote in his journal, "They fought like men possessed, no, fiercer than men." They seemed to welcome death. By midday, the ground is a blur of smoke, mud, and blood. The French artillery roars from the rear, tearing through palm trunks and sending shockwaves across the clearing. Slowly, the tide turns. The Amazons begin to fall back, their formations thinning. Yet they retreat in order, never breaking rank, never running. When silence finally returns, the French move through the battlefield, stunned at what they find. Dozens of women dead or dying lie among their fallen. Some still clutch their muskets, others their machetes. Many had fought to the last breath. Dodds orders his men to bury them with honor. He knows what he's just witnessed will shake Europe. These weren't savages. They were soldiers, and they had stood against the might of France longer than anyone thought possible. Word travels fast through the colonial networks, to missionaries in Huita, to traders in Lagos, to bureaucrats in Paris. The reports sound impossible. Entire regiments of women warriors, disciplined, loyal, and deadly. But those who saw them knew the truth. In the following weeks, the French would push deeper toward Agojie, the capital of Dahomey, determined to end the kingdom once and for all. But every mile would be bought with blood, because behind every line of male soldiers stood another waiting force. An army of women, forged in loyalty to their king, and unshaken by the guns of Europe. Before the battlefields turned to smoke and ruin, the Kingdom of Dahomey had already mastered something Europe couldn't comprehend, a system where women could rise through ranks of war, power, and politics. Long before the French cannons thundered, these women had sworn oaths stronger than iron. The Amazons didn't begin as legends, they began as hunters. In the 17th century, when Dahomey emerged as a rising power in West Africa, its king sought warriors who could defend the throne with absolute loyalty. The first of them were called Gebeto, female elephant hunters. They tracked beasts through thick forests, wielding spears and knives, their courage unmatched even among men. When King Agojie, the third ruler of Dahomey, witnessed their precision and discipline, he saw something divine and turned hunters into soldiers. By the 18th century, under King Gezo, the corps had transformed into a full-fledged military institution. Thousands of women divided into regiments, riflewomen, archers, reapers, gunners, each trained with brutal rigor inside the palace walls of Agojie. They lived apart from men, forbidden to marry, forbidden to bear children. Their only husband was the king. Their only duty was the kingdom. At dawn, they rose to the sound of war horns. Their drills were relentless, long marches under the sun, shooting exercises with flintlocks, hand-to-hand combat using machetes sharpened to a glint. A French missionary once described witnessing their training as the image of death itself, women whose eyes never blinked. They were taught to ignore pain, to walk barefoot across thorn bushes, to slit a man's throat in a single motion. Those who hesitated were expelled, or worse, loyalty was absolute. When a new recruit took the oath, she drank a mixture of blood and rum, then touched her blade to the king's statue. From that moment, she ceased to belong to herself. Inside the palace, discipline reigned like scripture. The women's quarters, known as the Agojie compound, were a fortress within a fortress. Only eunuchs and royal guards could enter. There, they trained, ate, and slept in perfect order. Each regiment had its insignia, feathers, beads, or painted symbols, signifying rank and specialization. Gezo's reign marked the golden age of the Amazons. He expanded their ranks to over 6,000 and relied on them for every major campaign. They led raids against rival kingdoms, captured prisoners for the slave trade, and guarded the royal court. Their ferocity earned them the title Minnow, our mothers, a term both reverent and fearful. To outsiders, this was unthinkable. European missionaries visiting Dahomey in the early 1800s wrote letters filled with disbelief. They march like soldiers, they obey like machines, one British observer noted in 1849. Their eyes hold neither pity or hesitation. Were it not for their braids and ornaments, I'd swear they were men. But to Dahomey, these women embodied divine order, a living reflection of the kingdom as spiritual balance between the male and female forces of nature. The king ruled as the lion, the Amazon stood as the panther, agile, ruthless, and untamed. When King Gezo died, his successors maintained the course, though European pressure grew. Missionaries begged Dahomey to abandon warfare and the slave trade. Yet every attempt to civilize the kingdom ran into the same wall, the Minnow. By the late 19th century, when King Behazan took the throne, the world around Dahomey had changed. France was carving its empire across West Africa. Trade routes were seized, borders redrawn, treaties forced, but Behazan refused to bend. He summoned the Minnow once more, their numbers smaller now, but their hearts unchanged. At the royal courtyard in Dahomey, he addressed them before war. "You are not women," he declared, standing beneath the carved symbols of Dahomey's ancestors. "You are soldiers of the panther. When the white man comes, you will remind him that the blood of Dahomey does not kneel." The chant that followed shook the palace walls. Spears lifted to the sky, the Minnow beat their chests and swore to fight until the last of them fell. It was that oath that carried them into Cana, the place where their legend would collide with France's modern war machine. By December 1892, the war for Dahomey had reached its breaking point. The once proud capital of Dahomey stood silent behind earthen walls. King Behazan's banners, once bright red with the emblem of a shark devouring its prey, hung torn and faded in the wind. The French columns under Colonel Dodds were closing in, disciplined, armed with modern rifles, machine guns, and artillery. But inside those walls, the Minnow prepared for one final stand. In the great courtyard of the palace, hundreds of Amazons gathered before dawn. The faint light glimmered off the brass fittings of their muskets and the polished edges of their machetes. Their commander, a veteran known as Sedong Hongbe, God speaks true, stood at the front. Her voice carried through the humid air. "We fight not for life," she said. "We fight for the name that will live after death." The soldiers echoed her cry, pounding their chests, a rhythmic thud that merged with the sound of war drums from beyond the walls. As the French artillery began its bombardment, Dahomey trembled. Shells shattered the ancient palaces of the Dahomey kings. Fire spread through thatched roofs and courtyards, turning the capital into a storm of ash and dust. Yet through it all, the Amazons held their posts, calm, resolute, ready. When Dodd's troops finally breached the walls, they expected chaos. Instead, they walked into a storm of musket fire. The Amazons appeared through the smoke, charging in waves, machetes drawn. The French fired volley after volley, but still they came. One officer recorded in disbelief, "They did not retreat, even as bullets tore through them." They seemed to rise from the ground itself. Inside the narrow alleys of Agojie, the fighting turned brutal. Bayonets met blades, flames crackled through the streets. The Amazons fought like spirits, silent, focused, relentless. Even as their numbers dwindled, they fought hand to hand, cutting down enemies at arm's reach. Colonel Dodds himself was forced to command from the rear, sending in wave after wave of reinforcements. The resistance was beyond anything his men had imagined. It wasn't just strategy, it was defiance made flesh. By nightfall, the city was in ruins. King Behazan fled north to regroup, ordering his palace to be set ablaze rather than let it fall to the French. The fire burned for days, consuming centuries of royal art, symbols, and history. The smoke could be seen for miles, a kingdom choosing destruction over surrender. Among the ashes, the last Amazons fought on. When the French searched the ruins the next morning, they found them, bodies lying side by side, still gripping their weapons. Some had taken their own lives rather than be captured. Others were found shielding the king's sacred emblems. Dodds ordered that they be buried with honor. Even in victory, the French could not deny their courage. The war officially ended weeks later. Dahomey became a French protectorate, its monarchy dismantled, its people folded into the colonial empire. But the legend of the Amazons, the Agojie, refused to die. Missionaries and soldiers who had seen them returned to Europe with stories that defied every assumption of race and gender the West held dear. Newspapers in Paris called them les femmes soldats sauvages, but beneath the condescension was awe. Here was an army of women who had matched empire with courage, who had defended their land when men with cannons and treaties came to erase it, who fought for a king, yes, but more than that, for the soul of Dahomey. Years later, French officers admitted that the Amazons had left something behind, not defeat, but a mirror. A reminder that Europe's civilizing mission met its fiercest resistance, not in men with muskets, but in women who refused to kneel. Today, their legacy lives on in the spirit of Benin, the modern name of the land they once defended. Statues and oral histories keep their memory alive. Scholars still argue about their number, their power, their purpose. But one truth remains unshaken. When the world doubted them, they fought. When the empire came for them, they stood. And when the fire consumed their kingdom, they did not run. They faced the guns of France and made history remember their names. If you want more untold stories like this, the ones buried beneath the dust of empire, subscribe, like, and share this video. History belongs to those who remember it.